Imagine a sunny day at SeaWorld, where families are laughing, kids are pointing at the huge orcas in the pool, and everyone's ready for a fun show. The water sparkles, and the crowd is buzzing with excitement. But in just a few moments, that happy scene would turn into a nightmare. A moment so shocking it would change lives forever. This is the story of Dawn Brancho, a kind and talented trainer, and Tilikum, a massive killer whale whose life in captivity led to a heartbreaking tragedy on February 24, 2010. It's a story about love for animals, the power of nature, and the dangers of keeping wild creatures in tanks. Let's dive into what happened, step by step, and uncover the truth behind that terrifying day. Tilikum wasn't always a SeaWorld star. He was born in the wild, in the cold, deep waters near Iceland in 1983. Picture a young orca, just 2 years old, swimming with his family, chasing fish, and diving through the endless ocean. He was free, surrounded by his mom and his pod, a tight-knit group of orcas who talked to each other with clicks and whistles. But one day, everything changed. Boats roared into the water and nets dropped around Tilikum's family. The orcas panicked, trying to escape, but the nets were too strong. Tilikum was caught, pulled away from his mom, and taken from the ocean he called home. Can you imagine being torn from your family, never to see them again? For Tilikum, that was just the beginning of a hard life. The young orca was taken to a place called Sealand of the Pacific in Canada. It wasn't the open sea. It was a small concrete tank. For an animal used to swimming 100 miles a day, this was like being locked in a tiny room. Tilikum wasn't alone, but his tank mates weren't friendly. 2 older female orcas shared the tank, and they were tough on him. They scratched him with their teeth, leaving marks on his skin. Tilikum was scared and alone, far from the ocean's freedom. Day after day, he swam in circles, performing for crowds to earn food. Over time, something changed inside him. The happy, curious calf was turning into a stressed, frustrated animal. The tank wasn't just a home. It was a cage. Then, something terrible happened at Sealand. On February 20th, 1991, a young trainer named Kelty Byrne was working near the pool. She was only 20 years old, full of energy and love for the animals. But that day, she slipped and fell into the water. The orcas, including Tilikum, moved fast. Witnesses watched in horror as the whales surrounded her. They pushed her, pulled her under, and didn't let her go. Kelty fought to reach the surface, gasping for air, but the orcas were too strong. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Kelty was gone, drowned in the pool. The news spread like wildfire, and Sealand closed down soon after. Tilikum's life was about to change again, but not for the better. In 1992, Tilikum was moved to SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. To the park, he was a prize, a huge male orca, over 22 feet long and weighing 12,000 pounds. That's heavier than an elephant. SeaWorld saw him as a star for their famous Shamu shows, where orcas did tricks for cheering crowds. They also wanted him to have baby orcas, hoping to make more stars for their shows. But Tilikum's past followed him. The scars on his body and the stress of his small tank at Sealand hadn't gone away. At SeaWorld, he lived in a bigger tank, but it was still tiny compared to the ocean. He performed every day, splashing crowds and leaping into the air. But behind his tricks, something was brewing. The stress, the loneliness, the years in captivity, they were building up inside him like a storm. Now let's talk about Dawn Brancho. Dawn was special. She was 40 years old with bright eyes and a big smile that made everyone feel welcome. She had been a trainer at SeaWorld for years, and she loved her job. Dawn wasn't just good at training orcas. She cared about them like they were her friends. She knew their personalities, their quirks, and how to keep them happy. With Tilikum, she was extra careful. He was the biggest orca at SeaWorld, and he had a reputation. After what happened at Sealand, trainers weren't allowed to swim with him. Dawn followed that rule, working with him from the side of the pool, giving him signals to do tricks like waving his fin or splashing the water. She respected his strength and knew he could be unpredictable, but she believed they had a bond. February 24, 2010, started like any other day at SeaWorld. The sun was shining, and the park was packed with families. Dawn was working the Dine with Shamu show, where guests ate lunch while watching the orcas perform. The show went perfectly, with Tilikum doing his tricks, and Dawn guiding him with her calm, confident signals. The crowd clapped and cheered as the show ended, and most people started to leave. Dawn stayed by the pool, kneeling on a shallow platform called a slide-out, just inches from the water. Tilikum was right there, his huge body gliding through the pool, his black and white colors shining under the sun. She gave him a signal, and he lifted his head out of the water, looking at her. Dawn smiled, maybe tossed him a fish, and leaned closer. Everything seemed fine. The crowd was still snapping photos, kids waving at the giant orca, but in one heartbeat, everything changed. Nobody knows exactly what set Tilikum off. Some people in the crowd said he grabbed Dawn's ponytail, which was swinging near the water. Others thought he caught her arm. Whatever happened, it was fast, too far, asked for anyone to react. 1 second, Dawn was kneeling by the pool. The next, Tilikum's massive jaws closed around her, and he yanked her into the water. The crowd screamed. Trainers froze, then ran toward the pool. Alarms started blaring through the park. Tilikum didn't just pull Dawn in. He thrashed and rolled, dragging her deep into the pool. The water churned, white waves crashing as his huge body spun. Dawn fought to get to the surface, gasping for air when she could. Witnesses said her eyes were wide with fear, her hands reaching for the edge. Other trainers shouted her name, trying to throw her a life ring, but Tilikum was too fast, too strong. He pulled her back under, again and again. For 45 minutes, the nightmare continued. The pool was chaos, water splashing, trainers yelling, guests crying as they were rushed out of the stadium. Tilikum kept Dawn underwater, rolling and diving. Other trainers tried everything to get him to let go. They banged on the pool walls, threw food to distract him, even tried nets, but nothing worked. Tilikum was in a frenzy, his massive body unstoppable. Finally, after what felt like forever, he slowed down. The water grew still. When trainers and rescuers finally reached Dawn, it was too late. Her body was lifeless, trapped under Tilikum's weight. The park went silent, the joy of the day replaced by shock and grief. The news spread fast, and the world was stunned. Dawn's injuries were horrific. Her spine was broken, her ribs cracked, her scalp torn. The official report said she died from drowning and severe trauma. SeaWorld shut down all its orca shows immediately. Investigators from OSHA, a group that checks workplace safety, came to look into what happened. They found that SeaWorld hadn't done enough to keep trainers safe around Tilikum, especially knowing his past. The park was fined and ordered to change how trainers worked with orcas. From then on, no one could get in the water with the whales, and barriers were put up to keep trainers farther from the pools. Dawn's death wasn't just a tragedy for her family and friends. It changed how people saw SeaWorld. For years, the park had shown orcas as happy, playful animals, like giant pandas of the sea. But after February 24, 2010, people started asking questions. Were these animals really happy in their tanks? Were the shows safe for trainers? Was it right to keep orcas, who swim hundreds of miles in the wild, in pools the size of a backyard? A documentary called Blackfish came out in 2013, telling Tilikum's story and Dawn's death to the world. It showed how captivity hurt orcas, making them stressed, sick, and sometimes aggressive. The film wasn't about blaming Tilikum. It was about showing how a wild animal, locked in a tank for decades, might act out in ways humans can't predict. Tilikum lived at SeaWorld until 2017, when he died at 36 years old. In the wild, male orcas can live much longer, sometimes up to 60 years. But Tilikum's life in tanks, first at Sealand and then at SeaWorld, took a toll. He had health problems, like infections and worn-down teeth from chewing on concrete. When he passed, some people were sad, but others felt relief. Not because they hated him, but because they believed he was finally free from a life that was never meant for him. Dawn's family didn't want her to be remembered only for how she died. They asked people to think of her love for animals, her bright spirit, and how she made everyone smile. Dawn wasn't just a trainer. She was someone who believed she could connect with orcas, even one as troubled as Tilikum. Her death wasn't her fault, and it wasn't really Tilikum's either. He was a wild animal, born to roam the ocean, not to live in a tank doing tricks for fish. The real problem was the system, taking orcas from their families, putting them in small spaces, and expecting them to act like pets. That day at SeaWorld wasn't just about one whale or one trainer. It was a wake-up call. It made people look at marine parks differently, asking hard questions about what we do to animals for our entertainment. Orcas like Tilikum are some of the most incredible creatures on Earth. They're smart, they have families, they feel emotions, just like we do. In the wild, they swim together, hunt together, and live lives full of adventure. But in captivity, they're alone, bored, and trapped. Tilikum's story, and Dawn's, reminds us that nature isn't here for our amusement. Some animals are too wild, too powerful to be tamed. As you think about this story, picture Dawn's smile and Tilikum's massive fins slicing through the water. Think about the ocean, vast and free, and the tanks that held a creature who didn't belong there. This isn't just a story about a tragedy. It's about understanding the cost of keeping wild animals in cages. It's about respecting nature and remembering those, like Dawn, who loved it so deeply. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you know. Let's keep Dawn's memory alive and spread the truth about what happened. Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that make you think, feel, and see the world differently. Together we can make sure stories like this are never forgotten.